All right. Sorry about that, guys. Mic check 1 2 1 2. I don't know if anyone had heard me around that time or so, but hello, mic check 1 2. Mic check 1 2 1 2. So, but okay, so we're on. Sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure that we were on. Sometimes you never know with these mics. So where were we? What were we talking about? Yeah, look, they don't give a lot of 10-8 decisions in the scoring criteria as much in mixed martial arts because it's very subjective, right? Like, do they count the knockdowns? Do they count the takedowns? Do any of the transitions matter? Now, what is it that the judges are looking for in terms of a 10 round? And then there's some that argue and say, well, you know what, maybe the 10-9 scoring system is just not the most effective way to go because it's a boxing style scoring, whereas with MMA, it just encompasses a whole lot of different compository sports that you're just not going to get in other sports. So therefore, it has to be scored in a very unique way that you would not score otherwise in boxing. But again, when it comes to decisions, it's a very subjective matter, right? You may like the takedowns more than the other guy. You may like the choke attempts or the submission attempts more than the other guy, the transitions more than the other guy. But the problem is you don't really know what it is that you're scoring, do you? But tonight, I think with Alexa and Shevchenko, there couldn't have been any more of a clearer draw ever in the entire sport of mixed martial arts than that fight. Another example of that, if you guys want to really take it back a few years ago, maybe even close to a decade ago, you're talking about Frankie Edgar and Gray Maynard. Who remembers that fight? Make some comments below if you guys remember that fight. I'm talking about the second fight with Frankie Edgar and Gray Maynard. Now, the first fight, they were both prospects on the way up. The second fight, now it is champion versus challenger in Gray Maynard, and Gray Maynard was just red hot at the time at the 155 division. So now that Gray Maynard is in this position to challenge Frankie Edgar, a guy that he previously had beaten, guess what he ends up doing? He rocks him really bad to the point where I think the judges in that fight with Gray Maynard and Frankie Edgar really had no choice but to score a 10-8 scoring. And guess what? It affected the fight to making it a draw in the end. Okay, so it's all right. Those are one of those fights that you can really call a draw. How about the fight with Dominic Reyes and John Jones? And a lot of people really thought that Dominic Reyes won that one. That was one of those fights that totally slipped away from Dominic Reyes, a fight that robbed him because afterwards he just went on this insane losing streak, like as if the performance that he had with John Jones was something that only he can do in that particular February night of 2020, by the way, just a month right before the pandemic, and was John's last fight before he went in there with Cyril Gane, and we've never seen him ever since then, right? But it slipped away from him. That fight could have been a draw. How about Alexander Gustafsson, the first fight with John Jones? That could have been a draw. We don't give draws enough as much as we should. And by the way, how about this? The Jack Della Maddalena fight with Kevin Holland, I would say is also a draw. Now, obviously, it's a split decision. Yes, a lot of people do agree with that because of how close the fight is, and they're going to sort of slide it down towards Jack's way a little bit for one reason or other, maybe because he just looked more of the accurate guy, whereas with the volume of Kevin Holland just really didn't match the accuracy that, let's say, Jack Della Maddalena wanted to display tonight. So, again, subjective scoring, right? There's very hard objectivity in how you can present that. Even in boxing, look, bro, you're talking about a sport where you just have two hands and that's it. If one guy knocks the other guy down, I think you know the clear score of that round. It's a 10-8, a 10-9, a 10-7. so on and so forth. And that's it. With MMA, again, it is very subjective. You're always going to have these controversial situations in the night. You're always going to have, every night and every week, you're going to have these controversial decisions. It's always going to be like that. Whenever a fighter wins very closely in a split decision, it's always going to be the water cooler conversation of Mondays. Oh, well, this guy did a little more than this. This guy did a little, and you know what? And here's the thing. The fact that we don't have an open criteria in mixed martial arts, I think is what makes the sport even more exciting. Okay, I know that annoys a lot of people. That's going to affect a lot of people that, let's say, are in the gambling sectors of the sport, meaning that, let's say, if this is your part-time job, your part-time hustle is to make money based on getting the right predictions, then I don't know what to tell you. Yes, that would absolutely suck for you. That would not be the greatest situation for you. But as a pugilist and as a purist of the sport, I think that that is the best way to go, considering that we really don't have a criteria, right? And then on top of that, you can also kind of put the guy who lost a little bit over, because now you have this narrative. It's kind of like in professional wrestling. If a bad guy wins, right? Let's say a bad guy wins in professional wrestling. How do they win? Usually, they never win clean, right? Ric Flair, when he was champion for the multiple times that he was in professional wrestling, he never won clean. He either had one of the four horsemen come in there and give him brass knuckles to knock somebody out, throw some sort of foreign objects to blind them in their eye, right? The bad guys in pro wrestling never won. So you can still put the good guy over who lost. And this is what I think the beauty is when it comes to having these weird decisions in mixed martial arts. So tonight, you may not agree with Jack Della Maddalena getting the win, and you may have thought that Kevin Holland may have won the fight, but he didn't win the fight because the judges gave it to Jack Della Maddalena. Still, the product of Kevin Holland is intact, it is protected, and just like what they use in the term pro wrestling, it's putting him over. Just like tonight with Valentina Shevchenko, it was a very embarrassing loss that she had against Grasso. Very much so, to the point where I would probably compare that equivalent to Sean Strickland and Israel Adesanya. Well, why would I compare such matches? Well, for one, you don't see it that way, because here's another thing I want to talk about with the women's headlining fight tonight. It's a championship fight on Mexican Independence Day that's not a pay-per-view. Well, why is that? Well, let's just say that, look, they're not going to put on a pay-per-view that's not a draw, okay? Valentina Shevchenko, I'm sorry to tell you guys, is not a draw. Is she famous? Is she well known enough in the MMA community? Yeah, in the hardcore MMA community. But in the casual fan base, it's very hard to know who she is, even if she was put in a Halle Berry movie. How about that? If for you guys who don't know, Valentina Shevchenko was in a Halle Berry movie where Halle Berry plays a veteran mixed martial arts fighter who has a husband that is somewhat of an abusive figure in her life, but is also her coach. And then she breaks up with this guy who is her trainer and who is her baby daddy. And she ends up getting with a female trainer. And, well, you know the modern agendas of today. So you know where this story is going, and you know exactly what Halle Berry did with her new female trainer. Okay, so that's literally where the story went. But then even in the movie, I'm going to spoil it for you guys. If you guys have never seen a movie, I want you guys to skip this in the next 10 seconds. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So spoiler alert on that. Valentina Shevchenko beat the living hell out of Halle Berry in that movie and won the fight. And rightfully so, it still put Halle Berry over, because how did the fight end? It ended in a decision to where she fought her heart out. She didn't win, but she won the moral victory. And once again, you could put the character of Halle Berry over in that mixed martial arts movie that he did, where Valentina Shevchenko played a Latina woman who was the protagonist of the entire story. So I urge you guys to check that out. I forgot what the name of the movie was. Let me look up the name of that Halle Berry MMA movie, just so I can give you guys some context. Halle Berry MMA movie, Bruised, 2020 film. The name of the movie is Bruised. So for you guys that want to check it out, Valentina Shevchenko was part of the protagonist role in that. So if you are interested, I urge you guys to check that out. But speaking of what I was talking about with putting stars over, this is literally what happened to Valentina Shevchenko tonight. She was put over based on the fact that had she lost this again, right, it would have absolutely tarnished her sense of invincibility, because prior to her getting choked by Alexa Grasso, we often talk to ourselves, my goodness, Valentina Shevchenko is just an absolute monster of a thing, right? Like, she beats everybody. The only person that has probably ever beaten her was none other than Valentina Shevchenko. Beating her was Amanda Nunes. That was the only person that beaten her. Not a shame at all. But everybody else she ran through, head kicking people, knocking people out, tossing people around. Just one of the most well-rounded 125 fighters of all time. Until, of course, she meets her limit, which is Amanda Nunes. But tonight, she was able to put herself over based on this draw and really not tarnish her entire brand, just like what I mentioned with Kevin Holland. Because let's face it, Kevin Holland is a very marketable guy. I really did not like that fight that he had to take with Khamzat, because I just knew that he was not on the level of Khamzat. But then at the same time, I wanted him to have his brand protected. But again, not a shame going out there getting submitted by Khamzat in the first round, right? And just making it just an absolute domination of a thing. Wasn't really good for his brand, but it was good in a sense where his brand was all about being the guy that showed up any place, anytime, and anywhere. And that is one thing that you can count on Kevin Holland. He's the new age Donald Cerrone. He's the guy that you can call on to fight anywhere, anytime. Israel Adesanya is the same way as well. You really got to give him that same credit in that light, because that is a reason why he just wasn't able to look as great as he did against Sean Strickland because of that. So some other fights to get to here. How about Daniel Zellhuber versus Christo Giagos? I know I've talked about this fight. Let me just talk about some few things that I've seen here. Now, one of the things that I like that I've seen out of Daniel was some really good jabs. He was really good at being able to use his height, right? Very tall, 155 or around 6'1", had the anaconda choke attempt that he tried on Giagos, was able to get it victorious in the second round, and just showed a great, well-rounded skills of boxing and his jiu-jitsu in order for him to beat a vet like this guy. Now, I got to tell you, being this tall at the 155 division, I think is an absolute advantage. However, at one point, will it become a limit for some other people? Because we've had tall 155ers before in the past, right? Obviously, there's Dan Hooker. We've seen how that goes and his limits. How about Jalen Turner, the guy that just recently fought Dan Hooker back in the summer of UFC 290 in July? Hey, how about that, right? How did he do? Obviously, there's a limit. Yes, can he go out there and hang with Dan Hardy and maybe even the top echelon of the 155 division? Yes, but he lost to Dan Hardy, but then you can only wonder where the limits are for him on that particular regard, right? Because being tall somehow works out if you are a heavyweight in boxing. Obviously, that's worked out for Tyson Fury. Being tall absolutely helps out if, let's say, you are the likes of John Jones and you know how to use your height, but also know how to use your height for the wrestling sense. But it seems that at 155, being tall doesn't normally translate. Now look at who the current 155 champion is. It's Islam Makhachev, 5'11", Khabib 5'10", Conor McGregor 5'9". Prior to that, what's his name? Dos Anjos, Rafael Dos Anjos, 5'8". So this is the average height of a 155er, right? Even Frankie Edgar, even smaller than that, maybe 5'6", 5'7". Not the biggest guys in the world, right? But hey, you know, I think there's a limit to 155 fighting, and I'm curious to see if I'm right about that theory. Maybe the taller guys just cut too much weight. Now, how about Chris Campbell once again getting that knockout against Alex Reyes? Right now, just the way that he was able to throw hooks at him, just corner him into the cage and get that hook on him. You know what? Alex was able to hit him with a cross, but then he was able to come back and throw a hook right back at him and knock him down right near the back of the cage, and you know, gives a little nice bow right afterwards, Charlie Campbell, and then he goes in and does the little rock spiel when he goes in there with DC and talks to DC, says something. He's like, it doesn't matter what you think. And it was crazy and interesting that DC said something to me. He's like, you know what? I have a little place in my heart for pro wrestling, so I'm going to let you live on that one. Almost kind of slagging off DC in front of everybody in front of national TV. Now, how about Roman Kopylov, right, against Josh Friend here, right? He was hitting him with some spinning attacks, spinning back fists. He was hitting him with some jabs, fake jabs, and then coming in and hitting him with a cross right afterwards, just knocking him down, stumbling him back up into the cage, bloodied up, right? And was able to get that TKO victory in the second round of 4 minutes and 44 seconds into that round. Roman Kopylov is somebody to look out for in the middleweight division. He's also had that body shot that he was able to finish Josh Friend with, right? He was just going up top. He was going down low. And then he fakes a jab from up top, only for him to go down low into the stomach and hit him with a body shot. A body shot that took him down in the same similar fashion that, depending on who you ask, Daniel Dubois was able to take Usyk out, and Roman Kopylov was able to do the same thing. Now, how about Lupe Goodniez taking on Elise Reed? How about the slams that she had going on into this fight, the hooks and the body kicks and the low kicks that she was mixing up, and how she was able to knock down Elise Reed into this fight and then just control her on the ground. She was going to try to go for a rear naked choke. It didn't work out. Then she transitions into an arm bar. Didn't really work out for her in the beginning, and then she escaped from it. She even put her in a triangle choke for a period of time, but then escaped from it and then just got back up on her feet, picked her up, slammed her again, got her on her back, and got a rear naked choke and was able to finish it with Herb Dean seeing that she had tapped right there in the second round of 3 minutes and 38 seconds into that fight of the second round. So another fight tonight, Edgar Chairez taking on Daniel Lacerda. So, by the way, you know what's really interesting about tonight, right? They showed the Spanish announce team right after every finish, right? Their reactions to it. So I thought that was really interesting. So Edgar, right, you're really interesting. A no decision upon replay review, right? The referee says that Edgar had choked him out, but then the referee had mentioned something to the effect of, well, okay, you know what? We reviewed it. There was no tap. So it was a very weird and strange decision, but it was really also interesting that they put the video replay on as an important factor into this whole entire fiasco, right? Because usually before in MMA and especially in pro wrestling, right? Whenever a decision happens, right? Whenever a referee calls for something to happen, that's it. It is the final decision, and there is no disputing any of that by any means, right? Well, this time, this is one of those situations where they had actually reviewed the tape and just decided, you know what, there was no tap. We're going to call play fair on this, and we're just going to give it a no decision. Now, what's going to come up out of this? Are these guys going to fight somewhere in the near future? Maybe even an Abu Dhabi card? Maybe they could offer them maybe some Apex cards that are going to happen somewhere down the line during this week. Who knows? Who knows what they're going to have going on with that? But I think that they made the right decision right here because, look, you got to understand something, right? This particular referee that refereed this fight, he had a reputation of really just getting a lot of submissions wrong, right? And even DC and Dominic Cruz hinted during the broadcast something to the effect that, like, man, you know what? These guys, this particular guy right here, has always had this problem. So these guys have constantly been monitoring this particular referee and the things that he does and the mistakes that he's made. And they called him out on it. And now it's like, what are you going to do, right? They're human beings. They make mistakes. But they rectified it is the most important thing that you got to understand about this story. Because you look at how this fight was resulted at the end, the way that they written it was no decision upon replay review. And nowhere in the history of MMA, from what I remember, they ever did anything like that. So I think that this is great. This is great for the sport, right? Because there's something that we can look upon in the future and say, you know what, if this is going to happen again, where there's a false submission or we think there's a submission going on, but there really wasn't, we can go back and take a look at it to confirm. So performances of the night tonight, Charlie Campbell with a great knockout that he had earlier of the night. Roman Kopylov gets a performance award. Lupe Gundiez. Daniel Helzuber got the performance award as well. And who else? Raul Rojas Jr. gets a performance award as well. Well-deserved, especially coming off of the loss that he did in the pay-per-view in UFC 290, only for him to come back and do it again right here. So how about the 170 division right now, right? The top rankings of the UFC division right now. Obviously, we know who the top 5 is. Very stacked up there at the top 5. Number 6, how about Shavkat Rakhmonov? 17-0. Steven Wonderboy Thompson still in the top 10 after all these years, right? Jeff Neal down at number 8. Sean Brady down at number 9. That's interesting. Okay, I guess maybe they ranked Bilal Muhammad really up high in the top 5 now. Vicente Luque at number 10. Ian Gary at number 11. How about that? Neil Magny just right underneath him at number 12. Kevin Holland performed tonight. Jack Della Maddalena, now with his win over Kevin Holland, probably puts him over. Perhaps maybe a fight with Jack Della Maddalena and Ian Gary somewhere down the line to break into the top 5. And then somewhere down the line, they may have to face the likes of Steven Wonderboy Thompson or Shavkat, or just overall skip them. And then there's Michael Chiesa in the final 15 of the welterweight rankings, which is quite interesting, right? A guy who's a former 155er. I think he's really honed himself into the right division as he's grown over the years. And look, here's the thing I think people really have to understand, right? This may fall into Valentina Shevchenko as well, right? I think that the older that you get, the more that you have to move up a weight class. So this is why I think Michael Chiesa is doing the right thing with that. I think with Conor McGregor's return fight, they're doing the right thing because of the fact that, let's say, he wants to fight a little bit higher because he doesn't want to cut all that weight. Because you're cutting all that weight, it's really affecting you somewhere down the line, right? There's rhabdo that you have to worry about that a lot of people never talk about. This is one of the aspects of mixed martial arts and combat sports in general that nobody likes to talk about. Yes, the prospect of brain damage and joint damage and all these other things that could destroy your body and your mind that's involved in fighting are present. But nobody ever talks about rhabdo, which is what happens in your kidneys when you're constantly dehydrated, which is what you do when you have to lose weight and cut water weight to make a certain weight class. And even worse, if you fight at such a low weight class with such a high body mass, trying to compensate to that particular category that you want to fit yourself in terms of weight classes. So that's a reality, right? So when you get older, you have to think about moving up a weight class. Now, what about moving down? Well, that right there could be a serious problem. You've seen Roy Jones in the past deal with those types of things. So yeah, that's pretty much all we got going on for the night. Obviously, some fights that I may or may have not mentioned. I think I mentioned, well, Fernando Padilla losing to Kyle Nelson once again, as I mentioned earlier. I don't know if the audio was able to pick up earlier in the beginning, but I'm gonna, forgive me for if I'm gonna repeat some of these. Roman Kopylov, we talked about. Tracy Cortez gets that decision against Jasmine. No takedowns for her in that fight. Stuffed 8 out of the 2 takedowns that Jasmine was able to pull. 10 takedowns she attempted, only 2 of them. But Tracy stuffed 8 in total. Alex Reyes, the brother of Dominic Reyes, losing to Charlie Campbell. Roman Kopylov gets that knockout win. Kevin Holland, Jack de la Maddalena could have gone either way. Rahul Rojas, basically the Aaron Pico of the UFC. And by the way, what an interesting matchup that would be later in the future if, let's say, Rahul Rojas decides to move up at 145 at some point of his career, right? Well, why not? I mean, Rahul Rojas is the type of fighter that is young. He's going to gain a lot of weight when he gets older, just like most fighters. Conor McGregor wants to fight at a heavier weight class so that he doesn't have to worry about cutting all that weight, and may probably fight Chandler at 170. But I don't know. I think he wants to prove himself as a proven contender, wants to put himself back in that mix, and I think he might really try to fight Michael Chandler at 170, 155 rather, if he really wants to make a splash at it so that he can erase all controversies that are involving that. So a few times Alexa Grasso was able to knock down Valentina Shevchenko was able to knock down Alexa Grasso here tonight. But once again, I got to tell you, I really agree with the decision of a draw. There's not enough draws that they throw out there, and there's not enough 10-8s that they put out there in the fight world, especially in MMA and boxing, as I mentioned earlier, they do because of the inherent structure of the sport. But tonight, I know that it's very lackluster and very cliffhanger-like for you to leave this particular show and this particular event seeing a draw, because it's anticlimactic is the word that I'm looking for, right? Imagine you're watching this Netflix show, you're watching Cobra Kai, and now they want to leave you with a cliffhanger until next season. And you know how that goes. Their next season is none other than the next year or the next following Christmas or New Year's. So you got to wait another 11 or 12 months for them to reveal whatever it is story that they have going on. That's kind of what it feels like. This is why the fans are always going to have this distaste for these types of decisions that don't have a definitive end. But one thing you have to understand and appreciate, and this is what I'm here for, is for me to help you appreciate these decisions and results, or results that you may not have liked, but a result that you have to live with, because it is literally the nature of the sport. You have to give the fairest judgment possible in terms of what the other person did and what the other person didn't do versus what their opposing enemy or opponent or adversary that they're facing that night, right? You compare and contrast those two things. And again, as I mentioned in the beginning of the show, judging is a very subjective thing. Yes, there are some things that are just clear cut more than others. 100% Sean Strickland versus Israel Adesanya was as clear cut as you could be when it came to, let's say, the aspect of who really won this fight. Mayweather's fights, a lot of the fights that he's had where he went to a decision, a lot of them are not very clear. They're not very clear. You don't know who won or whether he really won. A great example of that is the Oscar De La Hoya fight. A lot of people till this day, even for as legendary as that fight was, and one of those great fight nights that will be etched in history, still, we only knew who the winner was. We look into record books and say that it was Floyd Mayweather that won. But guess what? You go on YouTube right now, or you go into one of Floyd Mayweather's websites where he has the masters to all his fights, whether that was HBO or Showtime or whichever organization held on to those particular tapes and whoever has the rights to them. You watch them tonight, and you will think, my goodness, Oscar De La Hoya won this fight. Now, there's some that are going to say Floyd won the fight, but once again, this is why you never leave it in the hands of the judges, which is a common thing that Dana White loves to say. And by the way, how about this? Let's segue this into a different topic at hand, right? Because we've talked about the entire fight tonight. We now know that Alexa Grasso is still the champion. Valentina Shevchenko was able to save face and put herself over with this draw because it doesn't really tarnish her career. The same thing happened with Kevin Holland tonight. It didn't really tarnish anything that he had going on. Jack Della Maddalena is the upcoming star, and we'd love to see him take on the top echelons of the 170 division. He now has the opportunity to do that in ways that Kevin Holland was given the opportunity but may have failed. Raul Rojas tonight was able to redeem himself after a big loss in a major pay-per-view, fighting in front of everybody around the world. Daniel El-Kheer becoming a top lightweight in a division, putting his name out there in a card opener. Kyle Nelson. I mean, look, these are just standards of a fight night, right? But let's talk about Dana White, right? Because he had this interesting conversation with the likes of Big Boy from Big Boy TV, right? A couple of things that I had noticed about this particular interview. I thought it was really important to highlight the difference between the media landscape of when the UFC was starting out in the early 2000s. And when I mean starting out, I'm talking about under the regime of Dana White and its previous owners before Endeavor, which is none other than the Fertitta brothers. Now, why is that important? Because Dana mentioned something in that interview with Big Boy where he mentions to the effect that he did a lot of radio interviews back in the days. You see Eddie Hearn today, and by the way, a guy who emulates Dana White to the T. You look at Eddie Hearn, what does he do? He does literally what Dana White did in the mid-2000s, which is do a lot of interviews, but do it with a lot of different podcasters and a lot of different YouTubers and different social media platforms. Whereas with Dana, he did it the old school media way, where he went to radio stations. This is, by the way, how he was able to develop a relationship with Big Boy, who was a big LA DJ at the time, was literally the Funk Master Flex, the Howard Stern, but probably less controversial, of the West Coast. He was that guy, okay? And Dana White was able to promote himself through these systems of the radio back then. And I also thought it was really interesting that Dana White mentioned something to the effect of that today in the modern social media world, what is more popular and what is more influential is social media and not old media. So therefore, he doesn't care what the likes of CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, even though he has a great relationship with Fox News and has kind of leaned towards the right wing over the years when it came to his political ethos. But nonetheless, Dana White now understands that the media landscape of today is different than it was back then. And I thought that was really interesting to bring up. They also talked about the health journeys that both him and Big Boy had gone through. Obviously, you guys see Big Boy back in the days. He was a 400-pound man. Now you look at him, he's shaped like a runner, lean, looking like a swimmer. On top of it, Dana White, the same thing. He was looking a little bit unhealthy maybe a couple of years ago. And then within this year, he just started to look jacked. His face started to look a lot healthier. He looked like a better and much more healthier man than he was before. And it was because of these biological science researchers that Dana White has going on with checking out his blood, his sleeping patterns, the type of food that he has to eat, the type of blood sugar and glycogen that he has going on that he measures, and all these things. So I urge you guys to check that out. It was a very interesting interview with Big Boy and Dana White, and it really shows how the modern media landscape has come over the years, because you're talking about a guy who has lived to have seen it all. That this guy has been, I'm talking about Dana White, he's been to Mike Tyson fights in the 90s. He's done radio interviews when that was the only media outlet for him to get the word of the UFC out. He was very instrumental in being part of the social media world, because if you're the type of guy that likes to troll and likes to talk smack, guess what? Dana White doesn't feel that he's too big to answer you. He loves to answer people. He loves to create conflict. He loves being in the middle of beefs. He loves being in the middle of shouting matches. He loves being in the middle of conflicts. He doesn't mind it. He doesn't mind getting at people. He doesn't mind bantering. He doesn't mind dissing people if he has to. This is Dana White in a nutshell, and this is everything that we love about the UFC. And I urge you guys to check out that interview that he did with Big Boy once again, because I think that if you're a hardcore MMA fan and you're a longtime MMA fan and you've been one of those fans that has been around since the beginning of time, well, I think you're really going to appreciate this. Even if you're one of those new fans that have come during the Conor McGregor era, I think that you would appreciate this as well. As a new fan, you'll start to kind of understand the history of the sport, where it came from and how far it's gone to get to this level at this particular stage. So what else? What else is a good share for me to tell you guys in terms of MMA content out there? So far we are in the middle of September, right? What are some other September cards that we have coming up with the UFC? It's just mostly fight nights, right? Because next week you're back at the Apex again with Rafael Fiziev and Gamrot. A week after that, you have Grant Dawson taking on Bobby Green, probably another Apex card. And then you have Sadiq Youssef taking on Edson Barbosa, quite an interesting matchup in itself, probably an Apex card. And then after that, which is the 14th, where I mentioned Barbosa and Youssef, that's the same day as Dylan Dennis taking on Logan Paul. And you also have the main event of that particular matchup, which is probably now demoted to the co-main event. Not really officially, but should be KSI and Tommy Fury on the 14th. And then the 21st, you obviously have Islam Makhachev taking on Charles Oliveira. In that card, you have Khamzat Chimaev taking on Paulo Costa, Nasruddin Imavov taking off Ikram Alisarakrov. By the way, a guy that Khamzat has fought before. Magomed Ankalaev returns to take on Johnny Walker. Now, that's going to be an interesting matchup, considering that Johnny Walker has this team now that he's working with in Dublin, Ireland, which is none other than John Kavanagh, the coach of Conor McGregor, and has really done him some good over his career. So it'll be really interesting to see how Magomed Ankalaev bounces back from that draw that he had against Jan Blachowicz. And by the way, as we mentioned in the theme of this particular episode of this live stream, I mean, we need to give more draws as often as we can. And the Ankalaev and Jan Blachowicz fight is no different in that particular degree, right? It's basically in that same trajectory of fights that, well, really deserve the scoring that it got. And then you got Tim Elliott taking on Muhammad Mokaev. Really interesting, considering Tim Elliott has all these situations he has going on in his private life. How is that going to affect him taking on Muhammad Mokaev, who, by the way, is a guy that is funded by the Bahraini government, has the entire UK behind him, because if there's one thing that you can really count on in the UK, even if they have some of the poorest areas in the world when it comes to combat sports gyms, their gyms out there are very supportive with each other. They have great programs. They can always find fights going up into the regional and amateur circuits for them to upstart their career. So it's a great environment that Muhammad Mokaev is in, with a combination of the oligarchs of the Middle East backing him, with the Bahraini government and the prince of that country, who's a head special forces commander of their country, basically backing his entire career. And in here you have Tim Elliott having all these problems that most American males are having out there, and he's going to have to face this dangerous prospect coming up. So really interesting to see how that fight comes about. Victoria Dudakova taking on Jin Yu-Frey. And then in the beginning of the pay-per-view, you have Mike Breeden taking on Anush Jubil, or is it? I think they're still building up the entire card right now. I'm not sure if that's the entire main card or it's just a combination of the cards that are involved with that. But UFC 294 is still ever evolving in terms of the prelims that they're going to put in there. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? Because when you're a prospect and you're coming up, it's just almost like you really have to take these fights with almost no training camps. And I remember Chris Weidman said on his way up, the real training camp that he's ever experienced was none other than when he was defending his title, or when he fought Anderson Silva. And prior to that, he never had a chance to really have a training camp. So all these other names that they're going to fill out for this UFC 294 card, you can guarantee that these guys are going to get called in less than a month, in less than 4 weeks, in less than 3 weeks, in less than 2 weeks. And then if they got to put in some fillers or anything like that, it's going to be less than a week. And the next thing you know, they're going to have a few guys that are going to probably have to call in a couple of days to come in and take the fight on days' notice. And that's the reality of combat sports as an upcoming prospect, as opposed to these championship and marquee fighters that can, let's say, peak themselves in an 8-week period, a 10-week period, maybe even sometimes a 12-week period, depending on what your range is of peak performance as opposed to overtraining. And then after UFC 294, you're not going to have UFC for October the 28th, because obviously I believe that's going to be where Tyson Fury is going to take on Francis Ngannou, the former heavyweight champion of the UFC, or, depending on who you ask, the lineal UFC heavyweight champion of the world. And John Jones is just carrying the strap that is a replacement right now in the eyes of many people out there that look at competitive architecture. But nonetheless, you're not going to have UFC for a couple of weeks up until November 4th. Then you have Curtis Blaydes taking on Jailton Almeida. I really like that fight because, once again, Curtis Blaydes is a pure heavyweight, great grappler. Jailton Almeida is also a great grappler, but he comes from a 205 division. He's almost like the best way to describe him from the people that understand it from a boxing setting is he's sort of like the Alexander Usyk of heavyweight MMA, because he was a former light heavyweight or cruiserweight in the category of boxing and moves up to the heavyweight division because he just felt that the heavyweights just don't have the technical grappling prowess that can really manhandle him in any kind of way. Up until now, he's taken on Curtis Blaydes, who is a real heavyweight, who has great wrestling, both defense and offense. So it'll be really interesting to see how Jailton Almeida is going to perhaps counter the size and the experience of Curtis Blaydes. What is this comment right here? Michael Jordan's fans, worst sports fans of all time. Hey, how you doing? Michael Jordan fans, worst sports fans of all time. What a great name that is, right? Michael Jordan fans, worst fans of all time. Why is that? why I'm curious to know why you have that name and why do you think they are the worst fans. Um, I think, you know what? Let's segue this into something else, right? I think when you are the best at whatever it is that you do, I think that your fans are going to be as cringy as they can be. Okay, because you got to remember, before Manny Pacquiao beat or fought Floyd Mayweather, right? A lot of people really were convinced in their head that, well, you know what? Manny Pacquiao is a better fighter than Floyd. And they really felt that Manny Pacquiao can do no wrong. Oh, he's this, he's that. Next thing you know, Floyd Mayweather gets arrested, and then a couple of weeks later, he gets knocked out by a guy that he fought for the fourth time, Manuel Marquez, that he didn't need to fight. What did Michael Jordan's fans, worst sports fans of all time, say? Thank you. I would love to explain. Do you take calls? No, I don't take calls per se, but if you wanna write it on the comments, I'll be sure to show it like what I'm showing with this right now. But yeah, when you are one of the best out there, your fans are just going to come across as cringy. Now look at MMA Guru. He thinks that Khabib fans are the worst fans there is because in his opinion, he believes that Khabib fans try to live vicariously through Khabib and this and that. And I want to explain that a little bit, right? I don't think a lot of people really understand who Khabib fans are, right? Obviously, the majority of them are going to be Muslim fight fans, right? People that are from the Middle East, people that are from the Islamic parts of Russia, and maybe even in the Eastern European world, because maybe they feel a sense of connection with Khabib, no matter his religion or ethos, as a fellow Eastern European man, and something that they can take pride in within that regional accomplishment, right? But nonetheless, you got to understand that in the Muslim population, right, and when you grow up in a strict Muslim family, they emphasize education. They emphasize for you to go to school. They emphasize for you to open a business. So naturally, you're going to be gravitated towards a winning type of life. And when you're winning in that kind of capacity, right, you don't really see a lot of Muslim athletes out there that are doing that equivalent to what you do, let's say in engineering or nursing or being a doctor or being a lawyer. Then you see someone like Khabib. Oh my goodness, he is everything that embodies Islamic excellence. So I understand the aspect of where they say that, yeah, Khabib fans try to live vicariously through him, but is it that, or is it that they can relate to what other winners do? Because, I mean, yeah, maybe that's what Michael Jordan fans are like. Maybe they feel like they are winners of some sort. Oh, how did he say? What did he say here? Oh man, how come you don't take calls? You have a StreamYard. You should totally take calls. It can help your program and it can help you get more subscribers then. Oh, thank you. Well, you know, I'm quite new at this and I'm just trying to figure out how StreamYard works. But once I figure it out, my man, trust me, I will invite you in and have you talk and engage with different fight fans out there and what they thought. By the way, like and subscribe, as I mentioned earlier, but also tell me what you guys think were some of the highlights of tonight's fights. If there's any particular fights you'd like to talk about, but also how about some fights that you're looking forward to in the future? Also, let me know what you guys thought of some of my previous videos that I've made. I've made some pretty cool videos regarding Sean Strickland being a former Nazi. And by the way, I want to talk about that and address that a little bit for those that are listening or those that have heard those past videos and why I'm seeing all these strange comments from that particular video, right? So let's go to the comment section of the video of the Sean Strickland thing that I did, right? Because that one is quite hot right now in terms of the numbers that I'm pulling for that particular. So let's see here. Okay, so this is my video that I had made, right? It's 1.8K views right now. And I got a lot of comments on here. Let's take a look at some of the comments. So let's take a look at my comment that I wrote right here, right? I wrote something to the effect of, before you comment, please watch the entire video. I take consideration all opinions. If you listen long enough, many of you sound ridiculous thinking I still think Strickland is a Nazi. He's not. We all change our opinions as we get older. Please listen till the end until you comment. Yes, and the reason why I wrote that was because I just think that a lot of people, when they hear what you have to say or when they look at a title, they say to themselves, you know what? I'm going to think about this particular subject in this matter and hang on to that one particular thing that he's saying. So then you get all these types of comments. Oh, he's blue pill. He's this, he's that. He does this. He's siding with these guys. He's a liberal, or even if you're like the furthest thing from that, they want to label you as that. So yeah, let's take a look at some of the comments here in this pretty big video that I did. Everyone has a view. Some are different. It is what it is. Super happy for him. He got the title and won the fight. Yeah. You know, you can absolutely be happy for Sean Strickland, because who could not be happy for a guy like that who's gone through the things that he's gone through in his life, persevered through it, only for him to become a great champion. The Booty Bandit. Yo, what's up? The Booty Bandit says, yo, don't forget to like and subscribe, my man. Join this community, because I'm trying to build this community into one of the biggest mixed martial arts channels there is. And I think I have what it takes to become one of the biggest mixed martial arts channels out there. And I'd like to take you guys on this journey with me as well. So let's continue on with some of the comments that I got from that Sean Strickland video, right? So Tony writes, much rather have an ex-racist champion rather than a current racist. Very happy for Sean, who earned his world championship the hard way. Yes, he definitely earned it the hard way. And let's not forget, in the end of the year, he was just coming off of a loss from Jared Cannonier, and all of a sudden, in just less than a year, he was able to come back and get a championship win just based on the fact that Dricus du Plessis didn't want to go in there and take the fight with Israel Adesanya. And of course, it's deliberate on the part of Israel Adesanya because of the fact that, well, let's just say that, you know, I mean, oh, what is this? The Booty Bandit said. He says, I believe in you. Thank you, brother. Thank you. I'm glad that you believe in me. And hearing those words of encouragement only encourages me to work even harder in this channel and propel it to the next level. Thank you, my brother. So let's move on to these comments here. Let's go. Sean Gino Alpha. What's up? It's one of my Facebook friends right there. All right. I understand what you're saying, man. Trust me, I hate Nazis as much as the next guy, but Strickland made it clear that he was a dumb kid and realized he was wrong and changed his ways and is becoming a better person. You can't just hold it against somebody for life if they made dumb decisions as a kid. Izzy is literally calling DDP a cracker, but nobody seems to see a problem with that. And he's a grown-ass man and was a champion at the time of doing that ignorant bullshit. So before I go on and to his entire comment, because, by the way, I'm one of those guys that reads an entire comment. I'm not one of those people that just reads the comments because I have this reading fatigue or this sense of sloth and laziness that I don't want to read an entire comment. But I'm going to break down what he says here. So Izzy did call Dricus du Plessis that word. Okay, it's quite an ugly word. I get it. It's not really a word that I would use, right? If I'm going to go insult somebody of anything, it's just not what I'm going to do. But it's what he chose to do, and with good reason, because let's face it, it sells. It always sells. And if you don't think that this stuff sells in combat sports, I urge you to take a look at the old school movie of the one of the Wayans brothers. I think Damian Wayans. He played the Great White Hope, where he played a black African American champion who was a dominant boxer and couldn't really find any interest in pay-per-view sales. So Samuel L. Jackson, who plays his promoter, goes and looks for this former opponent of his who was a white guy who became a rock singer after his amateur career, and tried to bring him back into the pro boxing career because he was the only guy that beat him in the amateurs. And being that he was white, and being that there was a racial element to it, and being the fact that they tried to bring in all these racist trainers to try to lure him into this aspect of black versus white dichotomy, he just wasn't having any of it, right? So yeah, man. The point is, check out the movie. It's called The Great White Hype. So that's literally what it is like. Even as back then, people knew that race sells in fights. How about Max Schmeling taking on, who did Max Schmeling take on? I believe it was Joe Louis. It was in his era, right? Who was Max Schmeling? Max Schmeling was a fighter from Nazi Germany, a guy who represented Adolf Hitler. Now, did he want to? Maybe not. But the fact of the matter is, he was there. Very similar to what you see with Khabib, Khamzat, and all the other Chechenian guys today, where a lot of people look at the Dagestani and Chechen guys and try to attach them to some sort of political ethos of some sort that's undesirable to the Western minds. Well, that's kind of what Max Schmeling was, right? Because the way that history painted him, and when I mean history, I'm talking about objective history, right? They say, yes, he was from Nazi Germany, he was of German descent, and this and that. But the reality is, was the guy an actual Nazi, or was he just happened to be German and was a boxer and they used him to? Nonetheless, it was a big fight, him and Joe Louis. Same thing with Muhammad Ali when he took on Henry Cooper, and he took on that guy, Chuck Wepner, who was the inspiration for Rocky. And even Rocky himself, there's even a racial element to his story as well. If you guys remember, when Rocky trained with Apollo Creed, when he first started training with him, because he lost to Mr. T, which was Clubber Lang, he invited Rocky to come train with him in LA. And lo and behold, Rocky brings his wife, his brother-in-law. Okay. What was that guy's name? His brother-in-law. I forgot his name. Paulie. Paulie was the name of Rocky's brother-in-law. So Paulie and Rocky show up to the gym in Los Angeles of Apollo Creed's gym, right? There's obviously a lot of African Americans that are in that gym. Guess what Paulie says? He's like, oh, I don't like these people, or this and that. And I don't think people really caught on to that, but there was a racial aspect to that, because let's be real, right? I grew up in Jersey. I grew up in the Northeast of the United States. Now I live in California. But let's just say that, I mean, come on. They lean red over there, but they lean red to the point where they sort of have a little bit of some racial undertones behind closed doors that they would not often say in front of everybody out there. But nonetheless, that's neither here or there. By the way, I want to remind you guys, in the next coming days, I'm going to be coming out with 3 different videos, right? All with different subjects. I'm going to talk about the reaction to the face-off with Dylan Dennis and Logan Paul. I'm also, what else did I have in there? Let me see. Let me see what else I have in here. So I'm going to do one about Logan Paul. I'm also going to do one about Sean Strickland, and I'm going to talk about how he became the Stone Cold Steve Austin of MMA today. So what else? So after seeing the Dylan Dennis versus Logan Paul face, so at the current moment of time right now, everybody is upset at Tyson Fury because he decided to... Oh, yes. And then the third video. So, yes. So I have 3 videos coming out. The first one is with, and not in any particular order, by the way. Okay, so yes, I'm going to have the Logan Paul, Dylan Dennis face-off reaction. I'm going to have a video about Alexander Usyk and Tyson Fury and why I believe it is Usyk that is to blame, because everybody right now is talking about how, oh, you know, he is to blame for this because of the fact that this fight is not going on. We should blame Usyk. I'm sorry, we should blame Tyson Fury because he's the bigger star, he's the bigger name, and he's just an easy sore thumb to pick out, right? But the reality is that, and I'm going to talk about this in the video, but if you want me to talk about this now, why not? Right? A little extra bonus right here. So Usyk is not a marketable fighter. I don't care what anybody says. You can argue that till the day you die and say that, yes, Usyk is good enough to fight Fury. He's marketable enough. And that's where I disagree. Is he good enough to fight Fury? Obviously. He showed that he had the skills. He has the pedigree. He has the accolades to do it. But should he fight Fury? And from a business side, because by the end of the day, combat sports is a business, the answer is no. This is a reason why Tyson Fury has to take this fight with Francis Ngannou, because Usyk just can't be bothered with. He doesn't want to deal with media. He doesn't want to deal with putting himself out there. He doesn't want to learn English to the point where he can communicate with fans in a way that you see Canelo now communicating with fans. He doesn't want to do any of that. He can't be bothered with. So therefore, his promotion is going to suffer. Very similar to what happened with Joe Calzaghe back in the day. Frank Warren will tell you about that. He's got a few interviews out where he talks about how Joe Calzaghe just wasn't the guy to mess with when it comes to promoting. You can't call him up to do a radio show. You can't call him up to do a TV show. And if the social media presence was a huge thing back then, you're just not going to go out there and get him to tweet or make a video or say anything distasteful to try to build up the fight. He had to let Bernard Hopkins carry the fight for him in terms of promoting. If you guys remember, Bernard Hopkins called to Joe Calzaghe something to the effect of, I'm never going to let a white boy beat me. So this and that. Did you already talk about the Grasso fight? If not, what did you think? Fair draw, or was it a Valentino rob? Okay, so Booty Bandit mentioned this. Yes, thank you for the question. I did mention that. If you want to hear that, you can rewind back to the beginning of the show, of course. But if you want me to answer that right now, I'll answer it for you. Did I talk about the Grasso fight? Yes, here's what I think about the fight, right? I think that it's very important to have draws in MMA, and I don't think we give them up as often as we should. Because, first of all, there are some fights that are going to be deemed 10-8, and this is one of those situations where you can say that there were a few rounds in there that was a 10-8, both for Valentina and both for Alexa Grasso, so it's justifiable. I think another thing that I talked about with that particular subject, Mr. Bandit, I'm not going to say your whole entire name because it sounds like I'm sounding like a very vulgar man saying your name, but Mr. Bandit, I want to say that it is very important to understand that MMA in general and combat sports in general, when it comes to scoring, it's very subjective, right? And so, yes, I understand that it does affect some people's careers. I understand that it makes people go down a path of, let's say, well, if they were supposed to fight in the top 5, now they're fighting guys in the top 15, now they're fighting guys for lower money. I could understand how that can be a robbery in that kind of way. But sometimes it's very important to give certain decisions like this in order to create a fair competitive architecture in the sport. Meaning that, like, a lot of people are going to have high emotions about it because they wanted one person to win over the other. But the other thing that I talked about earlier was the anticlimactic aspect of the decision that people don't like, which is a draw. People don't like draws. They want a definitive closing because it is very similar to being left in a cliffhanger of, let's say, your Netflix show or whatever it is that you watch that, let's say, Cobra Kai. You know, you think that, like, okay, they're going to start this international tournament. And next thing you know, they leave you in a cliffhanger. Then somebody gets arrested. Now you got to worry about, you know, the next season and the next year. So you don't like it. You don't like it as a consumer. But the problem is when you're watching fights, even with the fact that they have a lot of these pro wrestling like storylines going on with real fighting, you also got to understand that it's real fighting and you got to give it the best, how do I say this, competitive fairness and hierarchy and meritocracy. The best meritocracy that you can possibly give it in the service of justice and fairness for all. So that's what I thought about that fight. It's the same thing also with the Jack Della Maddalena and the Kevin Holland fight. I think that that was one of those situations where, look, I understand that it could have gone either way, but you also have to understand that it did not hurt the brand of Kevin Holland, where it still put him over. And I think it's always important to understand that. And when I say put over, obviously that's a pro wrestling term of making the other guy look good for the sake of the business or the sake of the match or the sake of their brand or the sake of the overall league or promotion that you're a part of. So just like what happened with, by the way, speaking of Stone Cold Steve Austin, because I'm dropping a video that regards Stone Cold Steve Austin in the comparison to Sean Strickland's career trajectory, right? And well, I forgot my train of thought. Why did I bring up Stone Cold Steve Austin? So okay, yes, now I remember. The reason why I brought up Stone Cold Steve Austin was because he had this match with Bret Hart, right? That put him over even though he lost. In that matchup, it was a submission match with none other than Ken Shamrock as the special guest referee, because at the time, a lot of the people that didn't understand UFC or MMA thought that Ken Shamrock was the best grappler in the world, even though if you're a hardcore MMA fan or a hardcore UFC fan at the time, you already saw this guy get choked out by Royce Gracie. But nonetheless, he's the greatest grappler of all time, and he's going to be the referee of this fake submission matchup between Bret the Hitman Hart and the evil Stone Cold that later became a babyface while he lost. So not only did he lose gracefully, he lost in a very bloody way to where he didn't give up. He went to sleep in a sharpshooter, bloodied, and Bret Hart didn't let go. And then he stomped on him, and then it was what you would call the reverse face and heel turn. Whereas with Bret Hart, he came into the match as the baby face, left as a heel, and Stone Cold Steve Austin came as the heel but left as the baby face, because even with the loss, it made his brand even bigger. And then because of that, they made shirts of Stone Cold Steve Austin with blood coming out of his face, if you guys remember back in the Attitude Era. So a loss isn't always bad for your brand. And what had happened with Kevin Holland tonight was exactly that. What happened with Shevchenko was exactly that as well. So it's important to know that. It's important to know that even though you had a loss, and even though this happened, even the results of it and how the match played out still gave you this sense of respect that the audience who was watching at the time will gain for you. So I think that's really important to understand when you're dealing with decisions that are undesirable or controversial to many people. It's always going to happen. And I did mention Gray Maynard and Frankie Edgar. If you guys remember who that was, put on the comments below if you guys remember exactly who that was. and his fight with Frankie Edgar, and the draw that they had in that particular matchup, right? It's very lackluster in the way that happened, but that's just what you're going to get sometimes in these types of fights. So what else is happening? So we have, let's see here. All right, so let's see. Let's take a look at some other fights that are happening down the road here. I mentioned, yeah, the Fiziev fight, Dawson into Green. Above UFC 94, yeah, after UFC 94, you have Blades Almeida. And then after that, you have UFC 295, John Jones versus Stipe Miocic. Now, how about the price that they have going on for this particular fight card in the front rows, right? I mean, they're talking about like somewhere in the 10,000s. This is going to be like the most expensive seat ever. And I can only have a speculation as to why that is. I think the reason why the ticket prices are so high is because of the fact that they're anticipating or hinting at the fact that this could be John Jones's last fight. Now, if this is going to be John Jones's last fight, I say why not? He really doesn't have anything to prove. Maybe he wants to stay one more time and try to test himself against Sergey Pavlovich, or maybe not. Maybe he wants to stay and prove himself against Jailton Almeida, or maybe not. But nonetheless, John has a lot to prove in the new wave of the heavyweight division, but at the same time, he really doesn't have anything to prove in the legacy that he's already built, if that makes any sense to you guys. So what I'm trying to say is sort of a double-edged sword if you're John, right? Because there's a lot you still have to prove with these new crops of heavyweights, but you've already accumulated this library and this resume of killers after killers that you've dethroned and deteriorated along your way. Well, now you're taking on considerably one of the best heavyweights of all time, not named Francis Ngannou, and there is no chance of you ever fighting Francis Ngannou. So, at least for the time being, because once again, you got to think about the Tyson Fury and the Francis Ngannou fight. If Tyson Fury gets knocked out by Francis Ngannou, do you think that there's a part of you that thinks maybe John wants to come back and take on Francis Ngannou? Because now Francis Ngannou can really say that he is ultimately the baddest man in the world, because he not only went in there and won a heavyweight undisputed championship in mixed martial arts in the top organization of the world, but also defeating the top boxer in the world that is considered to be the lineal heavyweight champion. So John, I think, would be compelled to do that because he really does believe he has the style and the skills, but not only that, just the experience alone to just really handle Francis Ngannou in ways that others just weren't able to. So again, that's for the future. That's all for the things that are coming up. I want to thank everybody who has come to watch this live. I want to thank everybody who's came and commented. And I want to thank everybody who's liked and subscribed. And if you haven't already, please do, so you can help this channel become the biggest mixed martial arts channel in the world and be along for this journey that I am taking to that road. Thank you once again. I enjoyed covering these fights like I always enjoy covering every fight there is, whether it's boxing, MMA, Muay Thai, Lethwei. Obviously, I'm covering mostly MMA and boxing these days, but if there's a big fight that you want me to cover and anything interesting to take a look at, I'll be down to do it. Maybe do a ONE FC show one of these days, maybe Bellator one of these days if they do enough shows, or maybe PFL if it's big enough to where everybody has to talk about it. Maybe a Jake Paul fight, maybe a rematch with Logan Paul and Dylan Dennis in MMA. But nonetheless, look out for all the content to come, because I'm going to keep them coming and I'm going to keep it going. And we're going to continue to enjoy the fights in this theater of the unknown. Like and subscribe. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.